Can you hear us, Jonathan?
Everyone was freezing up for me for a moment.
You're grainy, like there might be something going on with bandwidth.
Mhm.
Hopefully, we'll be able to keep you.
Yeah, it was seemed fine
We
until
are
about.
we are live. We will give everybody a couple minutes to load into the session, or I like to say get loaded, so that we use the SIP and anything related to sipping. So everybody's getting loaded right now. We'll give everybody about a minute and a half and then we'll get started.
Great.
So, Frank, I thought I would like start by telling everyone about the time that you brought my um, mortgage collaborative trophy all the way across the United States from Arizona, right, from Scottsdale to New York.
That was funny. Yep. Yep. I felt like I had a UPS shirt on when I delivered it. It was great. It was fun.
And it's a
From
beautiful piece
Michael's
of
house to
glass.
your office. Yeah.
Were you nervous?
It was precious
Did they tell
cargo.
you that it was glass?
I was nervous actually.
That is crazy.
That's funny.
I tell people that story all the time. I was just talking about you earlier too, about how you helped Cross Country Mortgage when they first came on to Encompass.
Yeah.
And I started 2 weeks from when they had signed the contract with Encompass, and they had like two Encompass admins at the
Hmm.
training session, and I showed up and I came from proprietary LOS, and I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Surprise! Those are my two Frank stories.
That was a great engagement. It was really fun.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started for the sake of time. So, I want to welcome everyone to the SIP, a space where conversation fuels connection, collaboration drives innovation, and industry leaders come together to tackle challenges, just like catching up over coffee. The SIP is about meaningful discussion that moves us all forward. And TMC, we're committed to fostering a forward thinking environment where our membership thrives, grows, and makes a lasting impact. And today we're here to share insights, real world case studies, and strategies that highlight the power of working together. And a big thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. Today's show is proudly sponsored by Matchbox. If you have worked in the mortgage industry, you may already know the Matchbox name, particularly if you are using Encompass or Blue Sage. But today we are talking about something bigger because Matchbox has just formalized practice that is going to matter a lot to lenders who are trying to get more out of their secondary market operations. And in our most recent Pulse of the Network survey, it's still open, but I did jump in and check out the initial responses. And many of our lender members are focusing on secondary markets and how to generate more revenue and better execution. So I'm really glad that we're doing this today. So joining me are Frank Fiore, the president of Matchbox, and Jonathan Yosha, the co-founder and VP at Matchbox. Frank and Jonathan, welcome to the SIP.
Thank you, Jody. Really appreciate being here and really excited to be on the SIP for the first time. So thank you.
All right, awesome. We are really happy to have you. We'll dive right in. So, Frank, let us start with the news. Matchbox has been known, um, what they do in mortgage technology consulting for many years, but you have just launched Matchbox Market Advisors, or MMA. Besides sounding like it's professional wrestling, or I think there is an MMA. Tell us what this is and why it is important to bring to the industry now.
Sure. So we've always had a secondary practice and a capital markets practice. Jonathan has led it since inception. I hold him to the highest esteem of all of anybody in the secondary world in terms of his experience and what he's able to do. And he's uniquely talented to help um, the people in their infancy to the highest level of sophistication. So we've always had a practice, but we wanted to rebrand it and really come out and highlight what our offerings are. Because we're really excited about the opportunities that the technology and secondary are really growing in a lot of different areas. And I think, in addition to Jonathan's secondary capital markets experience, he really is able to bridge the technology arm with it, which is truly, truly unique.
Yeah, that is. And I want to make sure our audience is clear on something because I know the word secondary can send people in different directions, and Matchbox Market Advisors is not a hedging firm. You're not competing with hedge advisors. So for lenders listening right now who work with a hedge firm, this is not replacing that relationship. Jonathan, do you want to paint the picture of what MMA actually does?
Yeah, aside from being a mixed martial arts um, in an octagon, you'll never find me there. Uh, we we're true consultants, operational consultants in every sense of the term. We're focused on, or my end, specifically strengthening secondary operations. That could be anything from execution strategies, building out product and pricing engines, investor relationships, margin management, policies, adhering to those policies, reporting, data quality, technology, but e- everything that touches a loan can impact profitability. And ultimately, all downstream data impacts how secondary can do their job well. They're left with the final product to do what they can with it. Um, so, little background. You guys may not know, or listeners. Frank and I are former IMBs. 15 plus years ago, Frank was running ops and I was running secondary. And we were using a hedging firm. Um, and at some point, one of their managers made on an off cuff comment that we did things really well, and he wished every other client did things similarly. We didn't think we were just doing normal business, what we thought was normal. This was kind of infancy of before there were you know co-ops and big conferences and everyone getting together with roundtables and sips. Um, but we realized there was a gap in the market for someone who was really sitting there focused on how do I drive increasing net revenue while limiting risk and taking advantage of what technology offerings and automation we can bring to the table. So that's kind of where we fit, and we work very closely with the MCTs and Vices and Optimal Blues and all of the pricing engines. We fit right in between the client and the vendor, kind of asking the right questions and nudging them in the right direction to adopt some best practices.
No, I think that's a important distinction and a perfect explanation of the differences. And I do know that cap markets folks who lived through early 2000, the beginning of the pandemic, and the last 3 years, they have felt like they were in the octagon having the mixed martial arts fighting. But you're coming in at the operations level, and I think it makes sense that makes Matchbox interesting here is that you can connect that secondary side, the technology side, in the way that most consultants cannot because of your previous experience. Jonathan, how did that dual capacity develop? You talked a little bit about it, but maybe dig a little bit deeper into the platforms and what your experience was as a lender that made that come to fruition.
Yeah, from the lender experience and now also the last 16 years on the consulting side, we've had the privilege of working with multiple technology vendors and LOSs, and seeing hundreds of different lending models. Um, and while some of the technology may be different, the models may be different, some of even the struggles are different. We're ultimately all looking for the same goals. Efficient workflow, leveraging automation, and generating profitable loans. The question that's really left with is, how do we get there? How do we blend all of this together to take a clean, seamless workflow, leverage our technology, and have a great product at the end. So we're looking at reducing operational costs, reducing stress, increasing capacity. You mentioned, the COVID years of, the capacity blowing up. We're driving to address all of those challenges lenders have, and it's not a one size fits all. Every lender is going to be a little bit different, um, and we work with them closely to get there. What I've noticed, being in a secondary position, that always challenged me was every other department that I typically never worked with was impacting my job, and ultimately, self-serving. But at the time, I was bonused out on profitability. So nothing kind of grinded at me more than a messy processing or disclosure desk process that impacted how profitable loans would be, and therefore what my bonus would potentially be. So connecting all of those different departments and their communication from our end is really key. If we can drive automation for processing or for underwriting that helps me in secondary churn profitable loans, that's a win. But very often those departments are just very disjointed. They speak to each other when they need to and when there's a problem, but it's not part of the day to day. So we push for that.
Or it is part of the day to day because there seems to be hair on every deal, and
Yeah.
underwriting and cap markets are trying to figure out, does it still fit into the products that the underwriter had underwritten it to? And you're trying to
Yes.
figure out on the cap market side where the best execution can be in trying to pound that square loan into a round hole time and time again. But I think, the data is very important. I want to talk about data integrity for a moment because I think it's one of the underappreciated things that we consider. But I think more and more data is rising to the top. And it sounds like the back office problem is really a data problem that leads to profitability. Frank, do you want to elaborate on how that data integrity issues flow directly into the hedging performance?
Sure. So when we, like Jonathan mentioned, when, we we matured as a banker, going from best efforts to mandatory and then ultimately retaining servicing. Um, and through that, we found that the nuances of how important it was for the data going into the hedging model, and then what you were going to react to it coming out of the model. And Jonathan has had ultimate incredible experiences of helping lenders in really trying to understand how important your not only the data at the secondary level, but throughout the loan manufacturing process to make sure that the data and the controls are strong enough to make sure that the data coming into secondary is accurate, and then once you're reacting to it. We spent the last week at the secondary conference as an example of this, talking about all the credit changes and the Vantage score, and thinking about the data components from that perspective. So taking that snippet of that, thinking about where that flows, that'll start at the origination level, potentially utilizing multiple scores from an origination of a loan all the way through underwriting to locking to loan execution. And you could see the various levels of how that one piece and change of the industry is going to have a dramatic impact at the data level through multiple departments. So a lot of companies are going to be tackling that, and that's just an example of one of the areas that we can help clients understand the workflow and also the importance of your data controls in regards to supporting that change.
Yeah. And it's when you think of cap markets, you think of data tapes and or bid tapes and the limited amount of data that goes into that. But that doesn't mean that it necessarily qualifies just because you can get a price on it. So, Jonathan, investor overlay automation is something you've been doing meaningful work on. And I think it's extremely important because it does kind of take the bid tape data and also to the how a loan can be approved and the data that's needed through that. But walk us through what it means in practice and why it matters for execution.
Yeah, this one's kind of near and dear to my heart. I would even say, just because the data tapes has the data and doesn't mean it's sellable. I'd take that one step further. Just because it's on a tape doesn't make it right. Um, we can all get data on a spreadsheet. So I'll give an analogy on that in a moment. But um, we have clients and lenders, speaking to them, that I would say fall into one of two categories when it comes to the overlays. Some don't even know what that means. We've been met multiple times with, doesn't my pricing engine do this for me? Like, what are you even talking about? Um, and the answer is no. The pricing engine doesn't. The pricing engine takes standard data from an LOS and maybe some custom fields, and then runs it against guidelines. When we speak about overlays, we're speaking about things that aren't even typically in investor guidelines. They may be on like a one pager, or hopefully not like a 10 pager addendum of niche data points. So like I would say power of attorneys, escrow holdbacks, DACA loans. A recent common one is uh, marijuana and cannabis related income, right? So with that, it's an ever changing list of what lenders will buy or not buy, or maybe they'll buy it on a conventional loan and not an FHA loan, or under a jumbo product but not a GSE product. So even though some of those in my first category here, will then say, "Oh yeah, we've had kicks for those reasons," right? That's what we're talking about. Um, Other lenders have have kind of figured this out, I would say, and done their best to create a model in their LOS and workflow with their underwriters. Um, it's very manual. It leaves the underwriters having to know every investor's niche overlays for every product. So it honestly, it pisses the underwriters off. They're not happy with it. They're high priced employees. They get it wrong. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes they guess. So one of my favorite stories, to bring a laugh. Um, we worked with a very large client a number of years ago in the Midwest, and they were, super happy, thought they had it all figured out. Um, they had restrictions, underwriters flagged it, underwriters had to put in notes on why they were restricted. So I said, all right, I'm going to just test this out. So I ran a report of all of the notes for each investor that was restricted. And I could never make it up. They had notes saying, "Let's go Packers." Um, Clearly, the
Well, that
secondary,
was a mistake in and of itself, regardless of whether it was
yeah.
in a mortgage transaction.
uh, it was still back in heyday of Aaron Rodgers, but but secondary never tested or validated the
Yeah,
reasons. They just pushed that data over,
yeah,
and obviously they weren't too happy management wasn't too happy with underwriting, and it left us saying, just because you get this on a tape
Yep.
doesn't make it accurate. So we took the approach of automating these, building these essentially these guidelines into scripted rules. And we're able to automate the entire process for underwriters where the onus is no longer on them. So they're super happy. And secondary is happy because they have real data that they could rely upon. Having wrong data, it's costly if you're restricting investors, you shouldn't restrict, and it's costly if you're including investors, you shouldn't include. Either way, it's a loser. So having this automated through technology is our path here, and makes everyone's lives easier and happier.
Yeah. And you started talking about the clients, but I want to dig a little bit deeper. You recently worked with Lincoln Federal Savings Bank, who's a TMC member. Without getting into anything proprietary, Jonathan, give us the sense of what the engagement looked like and what changed for them. And I know that they were not the ones that said "Go Packers."
Definitely not. Definitely not. Um, So yeah, we typically cover a lot of our engagements under what we've termed a secondary review over the years. I always kind of key it as it's an annual or however frequent. It's your health checkup, annual exams. So for them, we started out assessing their margins and different strategies to drill down in custom, nuanced margins, and provide them some opportunities to gain margin without really impacting sales. Which is always a tough balance. Um, and then we worked on lock desk policies to better protect margins. Policies were well written at a point in time, but then new niche products start rolling out, and the policies aren't necessarily updated to address or cover the risk of new products. So we work with them on that as well. We focused a good amount on investor overlays for them. Um, and like many lenders, in getting a sense of their team, everyone was hardworking and well-meaning, but there was a lot of, we do this because this is how we've always done it, right? No one, not many people truly understanding why they're doing what they do. They were just told and trained over time that that's what they need to do on a daily basis, and we spent a lot of time. Uh, Automating some of those processes and training them on why what they're doing is a important, what it truly means, how it impacts profitability and loan sales, and how their actions impact every other department down the line. And once they started understanding and getting that perspective, they started working better together.
Yeah.
They appreciated one another's perspectives and why it's important to work as a team and not necessarily just in a silo based upon what they were told to do.
Yeah. And it sounds like you're also a communication consultant in helping departments break down the friction between them. I do want to make sure that we have time to talk about this, but I'm not sure that everybody knows about the agency work because it's specialized, and I think that TMC members may not know that it's in your toolkit. So, Frank, do you want to talk about your agency application and implementation work, including ULDD, PDD, and what is on the horizon with FICO 10T and Vantage Score?
Sure. So like I said, Jonathan and I, when we were lenders, and we, matured into becoming a real banker, what I'd like to say, in terms of getting our agency approval and understanding what it was to retain servicing. We had to go through all the application processes ourselves. So we were Fannie, Freddie, and Ginnie approved. So he did all of those for us, and he's helping clients with developing those packages and reviewing them and doing all, making sure that they're sufficient and we're not wasting any of the agency's times with inferior applications. But more importantly, what we found, and the more we speak to lenders and the agencies, once we got approved, we were exposed to, you get your agency ticket, everyone's excited, and then you have to get on to a series of phone calls, 20 different phone calls with Fannie or Freddie to say, welcome, this is how you deliver, this is how you execute, this is how you trade, this is how you do co-issues, all these different myriads of ways. And a lot of times the lender just basically were nodding their head and they just didn't feel comfortable telling the agencies that they really weren't sure what all this meant, right?
Yeah.
But that also included changing from investor specific guidelines to your own set of guidelines and changing your LLPA pricing structures and grids. So, that's where Jonathan really shines in terms of breaking down from an operational perspective. Now you have your agency approval. What do we do with it? How do we utilize it? How do we incorporate it? How do you price against retaining and releasing or co-issue? And what's our best avenue for execution? The hedge firms do a great job with that. We just help more from digging into your data and your model a bit more. I think once they get the data, they can help you with that. We'll help on all the operational pieces to help you, your underwriting team, your post closing team, as well as the secondary team. And then just globally, what I would also say, Jody, is somewhat like implementing a CRM, which is really specialized between a technology team and the marketing team. Secondary also falls into some this project where you really need a subject matter expert, and those projects really get stalled at the vendor level because either the IT team is busy or the secondary team is busy. But without those two, you really can't implement the PPE or you really can't implement the new technology structure. We have been able to help clients make those projects move a lot smoother because of Jonathan's expertise in those areas.
Yep. And on the FICO 10T and Vantage score, I know that that's at the top of everyone's minds. What's on the roadmap for that?
Jonathan, you want to take that? Because you've been taking the charge on that.
Uh, yeah, it's all coming. But outside of the select few that have been tapped for the beta program under Vantage, there's a lot of, we've got to wait this out for the rollout. But that all said, speaking with a client this morning, they said, what should we be doing right now, because they can actually sell loans with these scores. And I think the goal now should be readiness planning. Putting together a project plan and taking the necessary steps for the time being. Some credit providers don't offer the score. Doesn't mean you need to vet out new credit providers, or do you need addendums to your contracts? What is this going to look like in your LOS? Speaking with them from a user experience of potentially running two different scores. There are compliance implications for this. Obviously, there's a cost factor potentially here. And then from the secondary side, it's, are we pricing the loans correctly? What are our pricing engines doing? So there's a lot of work, I would say, being done by at least some of the pricing engines. I can't speak for all of them, but they're actively making updates to their data ingestion and their pricing models. The LOSs, I again can't speak for everyone, but some LOSs are absolutely building out functionality, at least to run them. Um, but there may be gaps, so
Yeah.
there is an analysis here of how do we make sure this doesn't go off the rails and turn into the Wild West of three different credit scoring models, and trying to rein that in when it impacts pricing and saleability. So we're starting to work with clients on that, and building their project plan so that when it does get rolled out, by the GSEs, they can flip a switch instead of just waiting and then starting the project, when it gets rolled out, they're going to be behind the eight ball. Um, so we're doing as much prep work as we can now to get them ready for the day it comes.
Well, if you solve the relationship between FICO, Vantage, and the GSEs and lenders' appetite for all of the back and forth, you truly will be miracle workers. But for today, that's a wrap. This has been an incredible conversation. We truly appreciate the insights that you shared. Huge thank you to Matchbox for sponsoring today's episode, and to Frank and Jonathan for lending their expertise. And of course, a shout out to all of our listeners. Your encouragement helps drive the industry forward. If you're looking to connect with Matchbox, our very own Tony Bramley dropped their information and a link in the chat to MMA to learn more. We'll be back next week at 2 p.m. Eastern for the entire industry on LinkedIn. And if you're not a member but want to explore everything TMC has to offer, please feel free to reach out to me directly. Cheers, and I'll see you all next time on the SIP. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.